This is Paul Leon from Leon Solutions, and you're listening to the Persistence Mastery Podcast, the show that elevates communication skills for people who love conquering their career. Welcome to episode 7, where we're going to be really touching on the close. In our last episode, we talked about objections and how quality salespeople don't do objection handling, they do objection prevention. And I recommended a book called Spin Selling, which is founded on Neil Rackman's work, where he studied over 35,000 consultations of the best sales professionals. And just to kind of recap some information, his work essentially has kind of really disrupted the industry in the sense that power closing techniques are not the most essential skill in doing consultations. It's having a framework of quality open ended questions that you ask throughout your consultation or in your sales process to create more commitments from the customer. And what that means is if you gain more commitments from the customer, you have a higher chance of closing them when it's time to ask for the order. However, to get there, it requires a framework of quality open ended questions. So, going back to spin selling. So, spin selling is an acronym that stands for S for situation, P for problem, I for implication, N for need payoff questions. So let's go into what each of those letters really kind of mean. And I don't want to take anything away from reading the book Spin Selling when I speak to my findings in it. It's still a call to action that I did in my last episode on really leaning in and reading that material, audiobook, book, etc., and kind of finding your framework of open-ended questions to help you in your next set of consultations. And I recommend at least 13. And if you haven't done that, in the next 13 consultations, I want you to create a framework of open-ended questions using the spin model to help you. And I'll also include in this podcast some additional links to help you or future educational resources to consider to help you further in getting this skill down tighter and stronger. So let's just jump right in. So S is for situation, and that's pretty simple. Most people who are new to sales or doing consultative sales kind of organically have this skill. More than 1 to 2 situational type questions can irritate our possible new customer, though, if we ask too many that we find or that the book speaks to. So here's the good news. In today's modern age, you have the internet to kind of help you, especially in B2B sales, to do some preliminary research. So when you conduct your consultation, you can say, hey, Mr. Customer, I did some preliminary research. I found this. Is there any other questions that I should know around my preliminary research? That might be a way to streamline a lot of your situational questions when conducting consultations. But now we have to lean further into the next letter in spin, which is P for problem based questions. And they're pretty simple. Just simply asking, well, what problems are you facing with your current system or service? And just let the customer speak. And it's your job, especially in a consultative sales process, to find other opportunities to encourage that customer to speak more. So if you're selling a software or a service, let's just go with that example. And let's just say that, in my day, one of the things I used to sell was attendance tracking software. So when I was doing consultations with a possible new opportunity, I would also try to look for chances to ask them a question. So if they said, an important feature to us, and is it an app that'll help us streamline polling, I would usually see in a lot of other sales reps, they make the mistake of going, oh, we have that. Let me show you that. Instead of saying, why is that feature important to you, if I may ask? And encouraging the customer to speak more to what they want will create more chance for them to talk about what they're committed to. See, I like this analogy in one of the videos I saw by Neil Rackham speak to, where he said, if I were to tell you, go ahead, there's 18 holes, just hit the white ball into those holes and just go ahead and do that. Well, you can do that, but there's a way to do it better. And there's a way to get a better score in golf. Now, I'm not much of a golfer. My knowledge of golf pretty much starts and ends with the documentary Happy Gilmore. But I like that analogy because it really shows that it's simple, but it's not easy. So, going back to the problem based questions, that is just another area you can focus. Now, if you're in transactional sales, maybe you're selling a gym membership, something that doesn't cost an elusive amount of money, then you really might be stopping at situation and problem based questions. Where true consultative sales starts to get a little harder and a little more stronger is when we focus on implied open ended questions into need open-ended questions. So let's say you're selling something more elaborate, maybe something that's into the thousands or even to the $10,000 range. So here's an example of an implied open-ended question. You shared with me that these are your current problems that you've had. Help me out to better understand that if you don't invest in a system like this in the future, what kind of risks are you concerned about? And what I'm doing there when I ask that type of question or example is it does sound kind of sad and it can be uncomfortable. And especially if you're more people oriented, it may be harder for you to ask those types of questions because you don't want to disrupt the relationship. You care about the customer. But here's the reality: if your service is what they need, we have to help the customer get there more on their own. So that way, when they buy, there's not a high amount of remorse or an opportunity for them to say, I just want a refund. Because when we start getting into manipulation, not influence, that's when we risk more refunds and we risk hurting our reputation. Because bad news, I will tell you this, travels faster than good news, whether you're in sales or not in sales. But here's the good news. Once you get good at implied based questions, which is simply just typically they leave a feeling of sadness. That's what the feeling typically is. But then here's the uptick part. Now you get to ask a needs based question. Once you have that customer, that possible customer in the right frame of where they're not just trying to avoid current, but also future problems. So a need based question might simply be, if you invested in a system or service like ours, what might it do for your home or business? And see, now what we've done is we've created a positive questioning framework to put it back in the customer's lap and help them own the sales process. See, one of the quotes I really, really liked about that book also was, the more we help the customer feel like the expert in the consultation, the better chance we have of closing and gaining more quality referrals post consultation. And when I look at my journey into being a sales trainer, I will tell you this: if I could go back in time 2 to 3 years ago, I would be teaching DISC, human behavior training, and more effective open ended question training. If I could go back in time and rewrote it all over again, that's what I would have changed. That's what I would have changed. And that's how powerful this skill is around open ended questions. Now, let's speak more to closing. And here is what a close is: a close is anything that puts the customer in a position involving some kind of a commitment, a final commitment. And not a final commitment in terms of you're never going to keep the relationship, but a commitment to say that you've earned my trust, you've taken the time to understand my needs, and yes, I'll commit to investing into your product or service. I want you to keep in mind, when asking for the order, consider using the word investing. I'm going to tell you why. Typically, when we say, this is how much it costs, a lot of our customers are thinking loss. But when we say this is the investment to move forward, we're talking about gain and we're talking about a return. See, when it comes to consultative sales, it's really about an investment where a customer can get a return on their money for investing their dollars or time into what you're offering. And the more we can get them to an investment type purchase, the more we'll get the buy-in when we ask for the sale. And there's a lot of different ways to close. There's assumptive close where you might say, where do you want this? Here or there. There is an alternative close which says, would you prefer to buy this on Tuesday or Thursday? There's even standing room only. Well, if you can't buy today, unfortunately, the price goes up tomorrow. And I look, I mentioned all those different types of, and there's even more than just those three. I'm just going to be real with you. There's a lot more than just those. I remember when I used to sell gym memberships, as I mentioned in previous episode, we used to do something called the Ben Franklin close. And that was in Miami, Florida. I remember I used to go door to door in the pre-sales department, and I was selling against like Bally's, 24/7, and a bunch of other different ones. And I remember if somebody was considering another buyer, I used to take a piece of paper, draw it down the middle, write all the pros on one side or the cons for the competitor and all the pros on ours to say, if we pulled up into a parking lot, which one would you buy? And here's the thing, all those closing handling techniques, the bad news is our customers know about it. They can go online, they get it, and they're pretty good at spotting it, especially if they're a little more seasoned in their career. They know what you're doing because it's not the first time they've seen it, whether they're buying a car, buying a house, or etc. However, when asking for the sale, this is what I had found worked best for me. I'll go to my days when I used to sell B2B and cellular, and we were kind of as a blended of B2C and B2B. I used to carry a clipboard, and in my clipboard, I would have my open-ended questions. And this is before I even knew about spin selling. So if I had that, I would have been better. And I used to, with my clipboard, simply when I got to the proposal, I handed it to the customer. And I said, here's the investment to move forward to get XYZ result. And I would just not say anything. I'd let that customer process it. And what I was hoping for, shooting for always, is that they'd say, okay, we'll move forward, which did happen. But even though I was personable, likable, and I put their needs first, there was still consultations. And it doesn't matter how good of a sales professional are, people are still going to say no on the spot. And they're not going to buy always in under 30 days. So you might be asking yourself, well, what do I do in that situation? Here's my recommendation. Let's say you hand the proposal and say, this is the investment to move forward. And they go, I still need to think about it for whatever reason. From 1 to 10. 10 being you have everything you need. 1 being there's still some information that you're looking for. What number are you? And if the customer says, well, I'm a 6 or a 7, it's not a bad idea to attempt another close. Well, let's just say your customer says, well, I'm an 8. Let's just go with that exaggerated scenario. Well, it's a pretty high number. Is it high enough to move forward with this investment? And they may still say no. However, if they say no, or if they are below a 6 or a 5, what you can follow it up with is, what information do you need to make a quality decision on this investment? And let them talk. And I'm going to tell you why that's an effective way of asking for the sale or doing a second attempt close. When you leave a consultation, and another really good podcast is The Sales Edge by Joe Peachy. And I really liked this one episode. I was listening to his where he talked about the 3 critical questions of ending a consultation. Number 1, where was the customer at when you left the home? Number 2, what information did they need? And this is a really critical question to know. When is the next scheduled follow-up date for us to reconnect on this proposal? See, that way, when you go to your leadership manager, etc., or your CRM, you know those 3 questions and you know their commitment. Book a meeting from a meeting, book a meeting from a meeting, book a meeting from a meeting is another principle in consultative sales skills, which is why it's an effective way to do that. So here are your call to actions as we wrap up part 2 of kind of the objections pieces from the last episode of this one. Number 1, if you haven't already, picked up the Spin Selling book, go through that, read that, work on your open-ended questions. Number 2, when you ask for the sale, don't say this costs what it costs. Just say this is the investment to move forward. And if they say no, attempt another close if they're above a 6. But if they're below a 6, simply say, well, what information did you need? And when's your next scheduled follow-up date? Thank you for listening to the Persistence Mastery Podcast. We'll see you on the next one.